Welcome back to Odyssey of a Teenage Dirtbag, the true story of how a kid who once had nothing, no direction, and no shot built a life worth living. If you're new here, I'm glad you found us. And if you like what you hear, I encourage you to go back and check out this story from the very first episode. This podcast is about what it really takes to climb out from rock bottom and why that's always possible. I'm your host, Michael. Let's get into it. This is episode 8, Downtimes. Caitlin didn't take my layoff well, and I don't know if she ever really forgave me for losing my job. Even though we both knew it wasn't my fault and that it was outside of my control, I don't think she could help herself from resenting me for the sudden change in plans. And I didn't blame her. She'd been depending on my income so that she could take more time off from work postpartum. And, fortunately for us, she was able to call her work and arrange to come back sooner than planned. But to her, I'm sure it felt like I was taking time away from her and her newborn baby. But it really was the only sensible thing to do because I was out of work. I was collecting unemployment and I wasn't getting callbacks on any of my job applications. We had agreed that I would stay home and provide childcare for our son while I collected the unemployment benefits and she could go back to work at the local veterinarian hospital. It wasn't a perfect plan, but we were struggling and it seemed like the only way we could make ends meet. Finding a job in 2009 was not easy, and it was made harder by my criminal record. Bills were slipping behind, and it was difficult to buy food, even with WIC for Rylan. I had to turn to the food bank each week to feed the two of us. The food I brought home was often moldy or expired, but it was better than going hungry. But poverty has a way of oppressing you. Like, first of all, you lose your job and then you fall behind on a few months of car payments. And then each time you get a late fee, and then eventually your car gets repossessed and you either pay a fee to get it out or give it up. You ignore other bills to get your car out, but then you can't pay your electricity bill and you get another late fee on that account. Pretty soon your bank account, it's overdrawn and you're being charged overdraft fees each time a bill you were supposed to pay attempts to charge your account. After too many charges, your bank account closes and you go into check systems. And now you can't open a bank account anywhere. So then you have to take your checks to a check cashing place. In the check cashing place, they charge you a fee every time you cash your check. So after a while, you need a payday loan to make up the difference. And guess what? The payday loan, they charge you a fee each time you take one out too. So now every time you're cashing your checks, you're paying a fee to cash your check and a fee to take out another payday loan. Then on top of that, maybe you get sued by one of the collection agencies and they start garnishing any real wages you're earning. So now you lose your car insurance because you can't pay that bill. And the next time you get pulled over, you get a ticket for driving without car insurance. Oh, and you can't pay that ticket, and so you lose your license. You get out and your car is gone because it was repossessed, and now you can't pay the fees. Oh, and it's auctioned off. Oh, and your rent's behind, and you get an eviction notice, and you still have court fees to pay, and a strange knock starts coming to your door throughout the day and night. It's the eviction knock. You turn off your lights and you pretend you're not home the first few times, but the knocks, they'll keep coming. And the cycle goes on. And so it went for me. Eventually, I was evicted from my apartment and forced to ask around for a place to take my new family. My parents allowed us to move into one of the upstairs bedrooms at their house, but times they were hard. But they were hard for everyone. Around the same time, my Uncle Wayne lost his job as a carpentry framer for new home construction. He had lived near my parents' house, and he was in a trailer park down the road, and he would come over frequently throughout the day, and we would look for work together on Craigslist. He was suffering under the same, economy I was, and so we had some kinship over our shared lived experiences. As a child, I'd always looked up to him. And as an adult, he'd really become a close friend of mine. Rylan was just a little baby at this time, and my Uncle Wayne, he would come over and hold him and throw him in the air, calling Rylan his little cherub angel baby, or Rylander the Highlander. It was just a special time for all of us. Even though we were struggling and down on our luck, we had love, and that was enough. My uncle had a drinking problem, though. He'd been that way his whole life, and it had been worse since losing his job. And I'd moved on from drinking really myself by this point, absent maybe the occasional drink at a wedding or a football game. But he really struggled with it, and things were on the up and up after we found Craigslist gigs as a way to find day jobs, which provided, fairly easy way to pick up some extra money if you were vigilant and quick on the draw. We would open up the Craigslist web page for gigs and refresh every 5 minutes or so throughout the day, waiting for various gigs to populate that we had the right experience for. And then we would, quickly respond to each one via phone call or email until we'd get a call back. And it just felt like a light at the end of the tunnel, after we'd been struggling with WorkSource and other temp agencies, to try and find anything meaningful in the way of work. He was around really making a turn at that time, and we had quite a bit of success in finding this temporary work for a period of time through Craigslist. I would go out and help a moving company for a day or go help a landscape company dig a ditch. And then I would take some cash home to help pay bills and catch up on anything falling behind. And my uncle, he was able to get some steady work too, framing. He was a carpenter, and so he found some different gigs where he could go out and work the day doing some framing work for smaller construction companies. And so it really felt like life was coming together for us both. And some moments in our life carry so much gravity that they become like a black hole in the collective memory of our existence, ripping through the fabric of every moment that comes after as they're all pulled into the central mass that was formed out of the ether of that precipitating event. My uncle's death was like that for me. He'd come over earlier in the day and had given me a ride in his little blue Dodge Neon to buy some weed from my friend Calvin. I'd quit selling weed just before going to Mexico, and once my son was born, I was determined to put anything that could land me in jail well and behind me, but I still smoked a bit from time to time. On the drive over, my uncle laughed and talked about work and life. He was a bit hungover from the night before, and he'd showed me some lotto tickets he had bought earlier in the day, and he was hoping that this time it'd be the big one for him. We'd swung back around to my place, and I took over watching Rylan so that Caitlin could go to work. I hugged my uncle goodbye, and I told him that I loved him before he drove away. Around 7 p.m. that night, he tried calling me. I was holding Rylan, and he was sleeping in my arms, and so I ignored the call, assuming I would get to chat with him later. The next call I got was about 4 hours later, and this time it was from the Pierce County Sheriff's Department. "We have a situation, sir. I was given this number to call from your sister," a sheriff's voice said to me from the other end of the line. "What's happening? What's going on?" I said, a bit frantic. Rylan was still asleep in the bed nearby. "There's been an accident involving your sister and your uncle, and at this time he has barricaded himself into his home, and we aren't able to reach him. We need you to attempt to get in contact with your mother to make arrangements for your sisters to be picked up. And if you can also attempt to contact your uncle, that may be helpful, as we haven't been able to reach him to surrender," the voice finished, just as my hand slipped and nearly let the phone fall to the floor altogether. My whole world started spinning, and I couldn't really believe what was happening. I rushed into my mom's room to wake her up, and she got the number of the deputy from my phone to make contact with my sisters. I frantically started calling my uncle to no avail. I left voicemail after voicemail, begging him to call me back, begging him to surrender to the police. I remember that night pleading with God, begging against all odds that my uncle escaped out the back door of the trailer and wasn't even inside at all. And really, he was just hiding in the woods behind the trailer park and waiting outside the police, under some bushes, just like I would have. I called my grandpa, to let him know what was going on, and I gave him any updates I had throughout the night. I was also in touch with my aunt and my grandma, and we were all just waiting on pins and needles for each update we received. Apparently, the whole situation unfolded after my sister and her boyfriend Kyle went over to my uncle's house to have a few drinks and hang out. My sister, she had taken my other sister with her, and they were, supposedly having a good time, listening to music and hanging out at the trailer park that he lived at. At some point in the night, my uncle's iPod shuffle disappeared, and my sister's boyfriend was always suspected of taking it, and it was likely that he did. But whether it was stolen by Kyle or simply misplaced will forever remain an unsolved mystery. But in a drunken, foolish stupor, my uncle pulled a gun on my sister's boyfriend and demanded the return of his iPod. My sisters tried to leave, and my uncle wouldn't let them without the return of his iPod. My youngest sister got scared and called the police, and they assessed it as a hostage situation. So they'd send in a SWAT team and a multi-agency response. As law enforcement arrived, my sisters ran out of the trailer, and my uncle fired a shot into the roof of his trailer, and boy, all hell broke loose. SWAT snipers fired shots into the trailer from the neighboring trailer rooftop, and tear gas and flashbangs were deployed inside. My uncle never left the trailer that night. He never walked out of the trailer again. His body was found in the hallway near the bathroom next to an open Bible. It was about 4 a.m. that night when I finally got the call that they had a body and that they would commence with the investigative stage of the intervention. I was sitting downstairs on my parents' couch, and I remember just screaming in abject grief and agony. I screamed into the night. I wailed into the nearest pillow. I screamed and cried and screamed. And then I put on my shoes and went running out into the night. I went running to nowhere, tears streaming down my cheeks, careless to the world. I've never felt such a weight of sorrow. It was like an anchor was tied to my heart, pulling me through the center of the universe, pulling me into a black hole of sadness. How could he be gone? How could it all be over just like that? I just saw him. He was just here, How could any of this be real? My mind turned over and over the same thoughts again and again. I was just in agony. I was experiencing a new kind of pain, the depth of which seemed unending, its ferocity unyielding. The final autopsy report said that my Uncle Wayne had shot himself in the head. I wasn't so sure, the neighbors all reported lots of shooting from the SWAT team snipers, but then again, we all needed someone to blame in our grief. The weeks that followed were really quite frankly a blur. I blamed my sisters for being there. I blamed the cops for intervening, but more than anyone, I blamed myself for not answering the phone that night. I don't know what sort of butterfly effect answering the phone call would have had on the final outcome of the events that night, but then again, I'll never know. And that's sort of the rub. Grief is like that too. You just search for answers. I don't think I handled it well at all either. I was a mess, and my parents couldn't deal with me and take care of my sisters at the same time. And so one of us had to go, and they asked me to leave. I packed up my family to go stay with Caitlin's aunt, who had a small mother-in-law style basement apartment we could stay at in Maple Valley while, we put the pieces of our life back together following, the tragedy. Initially, I tried to purchase my uncle's old trailer after the police investigation was over. He lived in Prairie Ridge, which is pretty low income at the time, and a lot of fees were the lot fees were just around $300 a month, and which was really affordable. I just had to fix up the trailer. Unfortunately, the damage done by SWAT was insurmountable for me at the time. All the windows were smashed, all the siding had tear gas canisters stuck inside. Most of the trailer still smelled like tear gas, and the carpet just had like blood stains with maggots feeding on what could only be brain matter, and it was just all too much for me to take. I couldn't live in the house with the spirit of my uncle's ghost sharing the space with me. Just not so close after his death and while I was still healing. So I moved to Maple Valley to try to make a new life for myself. Caitlin was still working at the veterinary hospital, and I was still struggling to find a good job. I was willing to take anything I could get, which ended up being a job over an hour and a half away at a Grease Monkey on Rainier Avenue in South Seattle. It paid minimum wage, which was around $8 an hour at the time. I was actually working for the parent company, Glass Doctor, but they had a contract with the Grease Monkey, and so I would go show up to the Grease Monkey and sell windshield rock chip repairs and help wash windows and prep cars that came in for an oil change. And it was actually a pretty fun job if you ignored the pay and the commute. I liked hanging out with the mostly black work crew of guys, and it was just kind of fun sharing cultures. Every day we would pool our cash and run to buy chicken wings at the nearby gas station or Ezel's up the road. We would take breaks between cars to huddle around the radio and catch updates on the Seahawks. And everyone just gave each other a hard time and good fun. And the hazing made for a fun work environment with lots of laughs, to go around. We were all poor and we were all working class. And it seemed to be all that mattered to really get along with each other well. We truly appreciated each other, helped each other, worked to build each other up, and generally we're just a good team of guys. I mean, we were all a bunch of sleazeball lowlifes when it came down to it, really. We're all we're burnouts in some way or another, but we had a job to do and money to earn, and so we all worked together to accomplish that shared goal. After a while, I was forced to leave that job, though. Corporate management was in Tukwila and wanted to transfer me to a Lake City location, which was another hour north. And I was only making $8 an hour, and it just wasn't sustainable. I was already working for pennies each day after spending my money on lunch and gas, and so it was just time for me to pivot. And I had an opportunity to apply as a caregiver for a lady in Issaquah, and I had made it through the interview with an offer for hire, but I had mistakenly believed that by this time my criminal record wouldn't pull on a background check. It had been a few years and I was really desperate for the opportunity. And so I didn't self-report my criminal record on my application. And unfortunately, I got a super pissed off phone call when my background check came back. She felt like I'd lied to her, but that really wasn't my intent. I just didn't want to shoot myself in the foot if it wasn't something that was going to pull, And at the time, I had thought my intervening job that I had at Rainier School between any criminal activity should have overridden any concerns if it had pulled. And, I thought maybe I could just explain them away with a conversation if it ended up coming down to that. But I wasn't really given the opportunity to try. She was so mad at me. And I mean, it was my fault for not disclosing it. And I admit that, but she was pissed, and, that didn't feel very good. So I decided to get creative at that point. I had this mountain bike that was pretty nice. I had traded up by using Craigslist. I'd started with this sort of goofy inflatable kayak, and in a series of trades, I was able to trade up to a Bedarka style kayak, which was a really nice one. And then I was able to trade that kayak for eventually a really nice hardtail mountain bike called a Niner, which was a 29-inch bike. And then I later traded that bike for a specialized brand, full suspension mountain bike, worth north of a couple grand. And I was reluctant to sell my bike because mountain biking was a daily pastime I sincerely enjoyed doing. We lived near a trail system, and I would push away the trauma of my uncle's death one single track run at a time. But I needed to make something happen for my family, and so I sold my bike, and I took the proceeds to buy a small landscape trailer, lawnmower, and trimmer. And I applied for a business license with the state of Washington and used the remaining $300 to purchase a stack of door hanger flyers from Vistaprint. A few weeks later, I was taking calls for greenside lawns and landscape. Thanks for listening to Odyssey of a Teenage Dirtbag. Every episode is another piece of the story, proof that no matter how far you fall, there's always a way back up. If this episode meant something to you, share it. Like and subscribe below if you haven't already. And until next time, keep chasing the life you were meant to live.